So yeah, to start. So DAOs, originally we created DAOs as more of a methodology to create unstoppable organizations. This was very much one of the first premises around it. But we've gotten to a stage now where I often ask myself, well, what's the point in being unstoppable if we're not being effective at reaching our goals? And yeah, we've struggled to reach our goals as DAOs, and that's part of the process. But we've sort of figured out the unstoppable bit. But now we have to figure out the effective bit. So current tooling forces trade-offs, as we know, in velocity for decentralization, right? Sort of makes sense. Not all the time, but most of the time, as you decentralize more, you often slow down, and often most crypto projects still need to move quite fast because most of them are still looking for product market fit, for example, right? And so these trade-offs, especially in the tooling, have hindered DAOs or on-chain organizations from actually excelling. So the average DAO today, right? I would say 99% of DAOs, and I show this all the time, follow the exact same governance pattern for their entire organization, right? Stage one, is sort of an off-chain state where anybody can open up a discussion in a forum, right? Regardless of if even they are a participant in the DAO, right? Stage two, anyone holding X token can put up the proposal on chain or not sometimes. Stage three, everybody votes. Stage four, a trusted group execute or not. This is 99% of DAOs. And every single decision in that organization follows this exact same governance pattern and flow. That doesn't really happen in the regular world when we're making decisions, does it? So what we have is we basically have cookie cutter governance. Every organization is governing every single permission, asset, and making every single decision using the exact same form of governance, which is a huge problem because nowhere in the real world does every single organization, whether it's a lean startup or a giant NGO, govern their projects in the exact same methodology. So the first thing we'll be really launching at a larger scale next month for the Superchain is context-based governance. At least that's what I call it. And it's on modular technology. So 2 years ago, we started rebuilding the DAO framework that we originally created in 2017. Aragon OS and Governor are sort of the two biggest. And we realized that this was not a scalable solution by any means, right? It really only allowed for sort of basic token voting. You had to fork the code base to rebuild your DAOs from scratch. Then you had to move all these permissions over onto this framework, and there was a lot more risk in doing that. It was very expensive. Smaller organizations couldn't do it. So basically what you got is you got some of these big organizations built in Aragon, for example, like Lido, are really the leaders, and they have these, they have a ton of developers that they can build these great governance solutions on for themselves, but then it can't be really used by anybody else because it's so big and heavy to run. So, sneak peek at what it sort of is going to look like in the future. So, as I said, most DAOs, all governance parameters, all proposal types are governed in the same methodology, right? And that's by design because right now on-chain you can't do it any other way unless you launch multiple DAOs and then try and abstract it away in one UI. Well, now we can do it in one DAO. So now we have different proposal types in one DAO deployment on chain. So here are some examples: minting, protocol upgrades, and grants, right? If you go to the next slide. And they can be governed in different stages. So within each proposal type, we can have a different governance flow. In this example, we have in our stage one, we have a simple multi-sig to upgrade, right? And then in stage two, if it passes, it will go to a community review. This is all on chain, and this is where token holders can veto this, right? And then in a different type of proposal, you could have a totally different governance flow. You could have just a multi-sig. You could have just token holders. You could have token holders followed by multi-sig. You can add a time lock at the end, stage three. So now you can start to have different proposals, different ways of governing within each proposal type. Next slide. And now you have different members in the DAO. Not all members are the same, right? Token holders may have access or power over certain permissions. A security council may have access or power over other permissions. And here we can see we have legal guardians. They are able to maybe veto certain decisions that token holders make on sending out grants if you don't follow KYC. You have the grants committee. You have your token holders. And so now you can start to actually have an organization running fully on chain in one DAO, no code UI, and you can start to govern your organizations properly, which has never existed before. Great, so that was the first big thing, that this will be accessible to all DAOs in the Superchain no code. So basically, like, any organization can come and in 10 minutes design their organization how they want, inject the members they want, launch and go. Manage their assets, manage their resources, manage their code. And then the second thing we're working on is ZK governance. This is really interesting because we also work with Layer 0, and that's one methodology for cross-chain governance. And it has some huge benefits, which include, being able to move tokens, seamlessly across chains. But there's this option too, which is using ZK proofs, so ZK governance. So one big problem, obviously, is we have voter apathy, right? Voting's expensive. It often means that you can't participate in DeFi with that token because you need to hold the token in order to vote in governance. So you have to make trade-offs, and the voting censuses are not exhaustive, right? So then we have another problem. Oh, this one's even more annoying. Token standards, right? So now we have, if you come to us with your DAO and you don't launch ERC20 vote standard, often with the ERC165 interface, you literally cannot participate in on-chain governance. You don't have the ability to actually vote. There's no snapshotting. There's no delegation, right? So with ZK proof governance, right, we can now start to actually have regular ERC20s be able to participate in governance. And you don't need to have the ERC20 votes. And ERC20 votes, to be honest, is a very heavy standard. It actually greatly increases your gas costs if you use it for all your token holders. So cross-chain doesn't work very well right now, we know. Bridges are often hacked. Users don't want to move their liquidity. This is one, let's say, trade-off with using like a layer 0 solution, which we also offer versus ZK proof, is you actually have to bridge your token to the chain that you wanted to participate on and govern on that chain. Well, you don't need to do that with ZK proof-based voting. Obviously, we mentioned the time waiting as well, which you don't need to. Next. Yeah, and so the key here is about removing friction. So we got, obviously, OP reached out and gave us a grant to work on this solution. And the solution, the TLDR, is that we can basically prove, you almost have an off-chain voting experience, but without the trust assumptions. So we can prove using the census that you create in your DAO that X person has X token on X chain, and they're able to vote and execute on, let's say, another chain or layer 1. So your DAO can be living on L1. You can have your token holders across different L2s, and even participating in DeFi, and they can still participate in governance. And this means that we don't need to bridge to vote. We can actually make it gasless to vote. Obviously, when we move the proof on chain, there is a cost there, a gas cost, but we can aggregate using risk 0. We can aggregate all the votes into one proof and then move that proof on chain. And so then we're paying potentially, let's say, like 2 cents for the entire DAO to vote. So there's a lot of flexibility. Basically, using ZK proof voting, you have the flexibility of off-chain voting, but with the trust assumptions of being on-chain. Yeah, and this works because, we did have ZK proof-based voting in 2018 that we worked, but it's super challenging back then. Now with new tools like Risk Zero, Steel, it makes it so much easier for us to build these things out. Yeah, I talked about gasless voting, we can skip that. Deprecating standards is great as well, we can skip that. Cross-chain census, as I said, we can skip that. And strategies, yeah, and that's the cool thing too. Like I think that's something we overlook is you can actually say, okay, all of the OP tokens currently in this Aave, using Aave or in this Uniswap pool, well, we can include them in the census. So those users can actually participate in DeFi and vote at the same time as well.
How do you account for that differently than traditionally? Is it just
So traditionally you can't, because the minute you move that token or using it in DeFi, it no longer can participate in the snapshot that's taken at the block time of when the vote goes up, right? And so now it's just because you're taking that proof off chain, you can just include in the census in the Merkle tree that oh, okay, I'm going to include all OP tokens that are here, 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 and here. So that has to all be predefined before, but that's still way more powerful than the current situation, which you can't participate in DeFi, because the minute you participate in DeFi, well, you don't have that token in your wallet to vote with. So the data storage will be directly on Ethereum, which is really cool with ZK proof-based voting. Yeah.
Who's going to set up those kind of
Yeah.
There aren't any entities that are going to want to do that. Like what I see in DAOs is people just can't really be bothered.
I think the ones who want to be bothered can then still participate. I think the problem is yeah, you'll always have some voter apathy. I mean, Germany had a 65% voter turnout at their last election, which is actually amazing, by the way. You know, in the United States, I think it's usually about 30 to 40%. So you're always going to have voter apathy. The key is it can be a 5% difference in the population of who votes can be the difference potentially in a DAO, you know, being hacked or not. You know what I mean? So like every vote really does count. And to be honest, so in terms of your question of setting it up, you would probably set that up at the beginning when you launch your DAO, and then you can add this in later. Like as this moves on, the DAO would then have to vote to obviously, you know, change that census, but you can start to change that later. But usually these things are done at the beginning, and I think most projects are taking a little bit more time and are a little bit more nuanced in how they set up their DAO now. Whereas I would say before the last 6 months, it was just a rush, and they weren't really paying attention to these things. So there's still a lot of setup required, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, because like the decentralized part of a DAO, it almost feels like you need a centralized element where you essentially like pay someone to administer the DAO and come
Maybe.
up with these rules
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And by the looks of it, this solution with token holders can vote on this, but also you can have like a separate group of people that is somewhat centralized that have specific powers or.
Yeah, and you can make it optimistic now too. Like with our setup, you can give power to a core team or a security council or whatever you want to act optimistically, and then token holders have a veto, right? And then a time lock. This means that the organization can run really fast as normal, maybe with a few extra days on the end to actually allow token holders the time to say, no, we hate this decision or not, versus the current setup, which is like 7 day in the forum, 7 day on Snapshot, 7 day on chain, you know, and a 3-week period to make a decision, which is just, you know, not super fast. So we have the customizability now. I think that's the key. Is like before we had no customizability. It was like, here's what you get. You can run your organization this way. Now it's like, okay, here are the options. Like you have options now to govern it how you want to. Yeah, okay, the final quote. So like there are 3 things I wanted to touch on. There's obviously modular governance. There's the ZK proof-based voting. So these are 2 things coming to the superchain. And the third is actually what I think is really, really important, sorry, you can get the next one, is tokenomic-driven governance. And so right now there's a huge just gap between what the token can actually do and what value can accrue to it, and then the people building the project, right? And the protocol itself. There's very few protocols that value is being driven to the token from the protocol, right? Often, previously, that was for regulatory reasons. And many projects, there is actually no governance power associated to the token. You know, there's a multisig that has full control. So the thing that we find very important is that if you have a broken piece of this link, and I'll talk about it in a minute if you want to go to the next slide, is actually token value accrual. So most governance tokens lack real on-chain power over protocols or capital flows. This creates a disconnect between governance and value accrual. And I'll tell you why in a sec. So we believe that tokens and governance are intrinsically linked. And if you are securing your protocol with your token, then it's very important that your token has value for people to have it to govern the protocol. If the protocol is not worth being governed, then it's not worth having the token, and then the security of the protocol decreases, right? So distribution liquidity obviously impact governance. If you have no liquidity, people can't get your token to participate. Too much liquidity, you can actually have problems with governance attacks. Distribution is important for defense purposes and different decision making. And governance decisions determine value accrual at the end of the day. Almost every project, when they decide to accrue value to their token, this is a governance decision, for better or worse, for regulatory purposes. So when these are misaligned in this cycle, then if one thing starts to suffer, they all start to suffer. A flywheel, right, can go up. But if you have a true flywheel, your flywheel also can go down. And if you have a flywheel that's cascading downwards, then your project can pretty much die really quickly. So here's a great example. Lido Arbitrum ENS. All three don't accrue value back to the token. Thus, the reason to own the token is pretty negligible at the moment, even though they're freaking amazing projects, right? Here you can see Lido, last 6 votes, 5 didn't reach quorum. They're built on Aragon. Arbitrum built on our competitor governor. Voting power, like the amount of voting participation has decreased drastically. ENS Brantley is yelling, delegation is only going down. You know, please delegate. Why is this? It's because what is the reason for owning the token, right? You're hoping that the token's going to go up. Okay? So if your token has no value, people don't own it. And then this brings back a huge problem in that all 3 of these projects have binding on-chain execution, meaning their protocols are governed actually by token holders, right? And so it's really dangerous if they don't actually have active participation. So that's why we have to actually start to embed tokenomics into our token and into our organizations. And they can help reward loyalty and participation, which in fact can help us secure our protocol. So token lockers are becoming super popular again. Curve built the original VE locker on Aragon back in, I think it was 2019 or 2020, maybe even a little earlier. And now we have Aerodrome who started to use it. Barachain, funny enough, just launched their chain using a VE token model, as has Mode, which is on the Superchain, and we've been working with Mode really closely. So token lockers with power over financial flows, so people who lock their token are able to direct financial flows, turns governance tokens into productive assets. So that actually improves the value accrual, and it also creates liquidity sinks. So I think for Mode, we have 46% of the entire circulating supply is locked, right? I think it's 42% for Curve. So now you start to sync your tokens and liquidity, and those are the people who have the ability to participate in governance, because with a locker, they're locked in long term, right? For Curve, it's 4 years that they're locked in there, so it's in their best interest for the protocol to succeed in the long term, and the more they participate, the more value accrues back to them, because they get paid to actually direct incentives. So we think that the one thing that we can improve on, which we've improved for Mode, and there's a couple other projects on the Superchain who are going to potentially be using this, is we're looking at more of a carrot approach versus stick approach. Historically, it was a stick approach. You had to lock for 4 years, and you had a decreasing power curve over time. So you would lose voting power over time, right? Unless you kept relocking. So it's basically like penalizing you for not participating and penalizing you for not locking. Now we tried to actually spin this, and it's become quite popular, which is we have an increasing power curve. So trying to incentivize people to have more voting power, to accrue more value the longer they stay in. It also improves loyalty, of course, and decreases principal agent problems, which is a huge problem right now in delegate models. So we want to reward participation and contributions to the network, and obviously there's human capital that's involved in that. Yeah, so here's what it looks like in Mode, right? So Mode distributes all its OP rewards to apps on its stack. And voters do this by actually first locking. They have increasing power curves, so the longer they stay in, the more power they have to distribute incentives to these projects, okay? They receive a small feedback for participating and distributing those rewards, so they're incentivized to participate. And so far, it's been really good. I think 46%, as I said, of circulating supply is locked. They have over 7,000 unique voters who've participated. I mean, that's probably the best voter participation I've ever seen in the industry, because they're actually voting on something they care about, right? Which is important. And I think over 40,000 votes have been cast. And if you're looking at decentralization as being important, well, those are pretty good statistics. And we've done it in a way that's really low overhead. Like there's no like giant conversations happening in the forum on this. Apps that come on Mode in the Superchain get uploaded onto this. The OP rewards that Mode distributes are distributed via voters who are incentivized to participate and distribute them. Projects who come on and want to have more rewards sent to them we call it bribing in our industry, we need to rename that. I call it incentivization. Can give out their own incentives to have you incentivize them or give them those OP rewards. There's definitely mixed feelings on if that's good or bad. Like, there's no question. For Mode, however, who've built this system, it's quite good because there's huge incentives for new projects to actually come on their chain, give out some or distribute some of their rewards to receive more rewards back in OP, and you start to get this flywheel. So, so that's sort of what's cool. And this is what the UI looks like, and it's been a really great success. And as I said, this is really exploding right now. Like, Mode, we're sort of one of the newer projects to do this on a chain level, and Berachain just launched their VE engages. So Berachain is now doing this as well. And so it's definitely the new, I would say it's the new meta. If you're launching a token in a project without value accrual to the token, and this is the typical new methodology, then like, what are you doing?
I have a question about
Yeah.
Mode.
Yeah.
The incentives seem very low for the rewards that are being distributed.
The incentive?
Does that mean that in most cases it's people from those projects that are voting on those projects because they just care about them? Or are there other fees that are not incentivization that are also being passed around kind of in the back?
I think that's up to Mode. I don't think there's much happening in the back right now. I mean, everything is like pretty clearly laid out in the UI. We do see a lot of people participating who aren't just a part of the Mode ecosystem or part of these projects, who are actually just there to get their rewards back. Like, some of these were at like 66% like APY at some point as well. Like, so they were quite high. Now they're obviously, over time these things sort of level out. But if you're talking about purchasing a token of a project or a chain you like, you know, do you want that asset to accrue value even if it's at 4% or 6%, or are you going to take the one where it has no value accrual at all? You know, the likelihood is this one.
Why I just found that very interesting is when you look at like the curve bars or the bell bars, whatever, the numbers are way tighter. It's like $1 in, $1.40
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And here it just felt so much bigger, and I was just curious kind of if there's something I'm missing or it's just.
I think it's because it's a new system. I think it takes time for these systems to sort of, yeah, I think it takes time for these systems to mellow out. The thing with the curve wars was, which is interesting, it was permissionless entry. And this is what then kicked off like this whole cycle. Whereas this one, it's curated to just the apps that are building on Mode. Yeah. Yeah, so sort of wrapping up here, the ability for DAOs to reach their goals and adapt over time. I think what's important is the fact that they have to be effective. Like, what's the point, as I said earlier, of being an unstoppable organization if you're not reaching your goals? So we need effective organizations, and those effective organizations will become unstoppable. And so I think that's what our focus is right now. Obviously, like, all of our tooling is open source, and it's always been very, very much focused on being unstoppable. But we want to now get to a place where we allow organizations to sort of not so idealistically govern themselves how they want to reach their goals how they want. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Any questions? Go ahead.
With that last slide,
Yeah.
the DAOs need to be effective.
Yeah.
I think the problem that I've seen is that, like, there's economic incentives, and people are not necessarily incentivized for the DAO to be effective. They might be incentivized for self-enrichment, for example.
But
So it's like trying to solve a problem assuming good intentions.
But then don't design your DAO where it's based off of financial incentives. So, like, financial incentives are one methodology of how you can build your DAO, right? Where financial incentives are the main goal, right? And a lot of projects do this and they do it wrong. That's the whole point. Like, and that's because there's only one system by which we can create organizations here, and everybody follows the same flow pattern. It's like, launch your token before you've even reached product market fit, before you have users, try and pay people to use your product. You know what I mean? And then obviously it comes crashing down when you run out of incentives to give. You have to inherently create value to give that value back. It's just, again, it depends what you're trying to achieve as an organization, right? The one use case that seems to be working in crypto, for better or worse, is around financialization. Like, we've sort of figured that one out more than other use cases. And the reason, and even for us as tooling providers, there's a lot more money in providing tools to organizations that are focused on financialization. It's not so easy to give a great regen project DAO tooling and expect to have great returns back, right? We need to figure that out, there's no question. I actually do wonder if, you know, we rag on Vitalik for not, like, you know, promoting DeFi projects enough, and I just wonder if that's because he thought they didn't need as much help, and he was trying to actually, you know, incentivize and support projects that were not doing that. So again, it's just about what organization you're trying to build. Like, our protocol is, its primitive is permissions. Like previously, so Safe, for example, its primitive is a multi-signature account. That's like what it is and does. Ours is just permissions. X person can do X thing under X circumstance. That's it. And so we just allow you to create the organization you want on-chain however you want it. Digital identification, tokens, wallet-based, using financial incentives or not, right? Using ZK proof voting or not. We just create these tools and we say, build the organization you want, right? And I just believe that right now the meta, and that's why I'm talking about it right now, is financialization, is everybody's focusing back on DeFi right now. And so this is why I present this today, because this is what most projects are interested in on the Superchain.
Yeah, I think it was Leutenegger used the term decentralization theater.
Mm-hmm.
How like a lot of DAOs are essentially created to then give justification to creating a token.
Yeah.
So that people
Can exit. Yeah. Yeah.
And like, so having the token earn money
Mm-hmm.
is kind of irrelevant. The DAO is just a facade in many respects. And how does this kind of...
It's only a facade. So it's a facade if there's no value accruing to the token. I think it's a complete opposite of what you said. If you're not accruing value to the token for people holding the token, and then you're selling the token because it has no underlying value, that's a facade. But if you're actually accruing value to your token, that's equity almost.
I think
Careful.
a great example that I've been close to is Balancer.
Mm-hmm.
I was contributing to Balancer 2.5 years ago. I was like a coordination maxi. I was trying to unite people and do a lot of like things. And at some point they moved to a VE model, and there were some early gains and it wasn't great. But at some point I realized that I shouldn't be coordinating. The mechanism just worked, and at this point Balancer is net positive. It's funding most of its contributions with its revenue. But it has revenue, and that is really something that wasn't included with that VE model. And then over time, they tweaked it where maybe certain pools that make more money get better incentives or get more like a vote boost. And but for the past 2 years, for better or worse, and it's not perfect, but they have operated a on-chain vehicle that gets money in, distributes rewards, and pays people to keep evolving it.
Yeah. And the protocol is safer for it.
And it works and it's growing. So I think what Anthony is presenting here, I think from like kind of a test we have, I've seen that if you do have all of those things, there's potential and will or can work. But again, like I said, if there's nowhere, like if there's no value accrual to the middle, then why care about the middle? I think that's kind of the whole, what I'm hearing today is like better to double down and make it function than to kind of shy away from it. And Lefter is, for example, right? He's more like an open source developer kind of archetype, where maybe he's not as interested like in like equity-like things in general, and therefore maybe not participating in things like Balancer that are maybe a bit more financialized and a bit more for profit, maybe even.
I actually think that Leutenegger is okay with those because they're actually honest. Like they're honest and on-chain and fully verifiable, and they're real DAOs because it's binding on-chain execution. I think what Leutenegger hates, because I actually know him, is projects where token holders have no power, and there's no value that accrues to the token, and it's just governance theater, and that there's a multi-sig or a team that do everything. The token has no value. There's no reason for the token to exist. But what we're seeing is quite different now, is that projects are starting to, good projects are all looking at accruing value back to their token. Like Hasu in the Lido forum only like 3 weeks ago wrote that like it's time we start looking at that. The reason projects haven't done that before is that would be considered equity from a regulatory perspective. And that would mean that they would be, the SEC could come down on them. Like that's the honest truth of the matter, right? And so projects, that's why Uniswap did not actually turn on the Unistaker and give anything back to the token, right? So now we're coming to a regulatory environment. That's why I presented this today, is because it's becoming more clear that you can there will be a path. They haven't decided on it yet, but there will be a sensible path to actually accruing value back to a token. And so that's why all projects right now, it's called the year of the fee switch, is what we're calling it, right? So I think those are, again, a real DAO. Like, what is a DAO? I think this is like, nobody can answer this question. For me, it's actually the underlying permission management system that we built. It's actually binding on-chain executable. So the DAO is the multisig. It's not the token holders that don't have power to execute, to move the money, or to change the code. If the DAO, if it's controlled by that multisig, sorry, actually, technically, the DAO is that multisig. And that's not a very popular take, but it's sort of the truth from an on-chain perspective. So whoever has the hard power is actually truth, and it's only governance theater when people don't actually have hard power or value accrual to do anything. So what this framework tries to do is try to actually give hard power. You can actually vote on chain to direct incentives. That's a DAO. You can actually, the value will accrue to the token that you have, and you will be rewarded for participating to secure the network and to secure where those funds go. So that sort of flywheel is like really, I think Lefteris would love that. I think he'd be like, that is actually a real DAO. Now, but I get your point, and like, yeah, like we have a lot to fix. I mean, when you're dodging the SEC and don't have no understanding of what the SEC is going to do when you're building your project, like how can you make great decisions to actually set these things up right? You can't. And so what happens? You use obfuscation, you use different techniques to try and do what you can, and then you're always hiding from them, you don't want to make decisions, but now you see it right away. Like the fee switch of 2025, everybody's talking about it. It's because they have clarity now, or more clarity. So yeah.
I think I'm in agreement with you. I'm just kind of trying to work out how one would approach moving it down towards kind of being better.
Yeah, this is just one idea we have, which is like if you don't have the points of value accrual and ownership connected to the protocol all working together, if one of those points fails, then the flywheel doesn't work and you don't really have an effective organization. Your protocol doesn't receive the defensibility it needs because there's no reason to hold the token, because there's no value that accrues to the token. And so then people insert a multisig or a trusted component in to actually govern it to make it safe. So yeah, and a lot of projects won't be able to successfully do this, but the ones that do will be, I think, very successful. Yeah. But yeah, so that's the update. Like lots of DAO tooling come to the Superchain. Very excited for the future. And thanks for listening.
So thanks so much.
Thank you.